Yesterday I tried to describe some aspects of the overall human constitution, concluding by pointing out that a correspondingly holistic perspective can enable us to build a bridge between our external organism and our interior self-awareness. No such bridge, or only the most tenuous and inadequate one, is built by modern science. To build such a bridge, as we saw, we have to be clear about how to regard the human organism. We found that the only aspect of the human organism to which popular opinion, and science especially, give serious credence, and whose existence as a structured organism they acknowledge, is the solid or semi-solid organism. Yet we must regard this as only one alongside a fluid organism, an aeriform organism, and a warmth or temperature organism. By this means we can also start to see how the diverse levels of the human entelechy engage with and intervene in this finer organism. Naturally, everything up to and including the warmth body is physical in nature. The ether body primarily engages with the fluid body, with everything in the organism that has a fluid organizing action. The astral body engages with the air organism, and the I, capital, primarily engages with everything organized as warmth or temperature. These observations enable us to remain in the physical realm, in a sense, yet at the same time to ascend as far as the realm of spirit. Then we looked at human consciousness too. Usually, as I said yesterday, we only take account of a form of consciousness we know in our waking state, between waking up and falling asleep. In this condition we perceive the objects around us, applying our reasoning faculty to combine them, forming feelings about them too, and responding to them in our impulses of will. This whole complex of our consciousness is, however, something whose qualities we experience as very different from the whole physical realm, which is the sole object of modern scientific inquiry. And it is not easy or straightforward to create a bridge between these entirely non-corporeal experiences in our mind and the other perceptions, the other perceptual objects, which are studied in physical-based physiology or anatomy. Alongside ordinary consciousness, however, we must also consider dream consciousness, and yesterday we described how dreams are largely images or symbols of inner organic processes. There is always something occurring within us, and dreams give pictorial expression to what is occurring. As I said, a dream about twisting snakes may express an intestinal disorder, or we may awaken from a dream about a boiling saucepan with heart palpitations. Here the boiling saucepan has given us the symbolic image of an irregular heartbeat, and the snakes symbolize the intestines and so forth. The dream directs us to our physical organism. In deep sleep, consciousness is very dull and dim, is more or less a zero experience for us. And yet, as I described yesterday, this zero experience is needed for us to feel the connection with our corporeality. As an I, we would not feel this connection if we did not depart from the body in sleep and then return to it again on awakening. We feel one with the body precisely because we relinquish it, feel deprived of it between falling asleep and waking up again. Our ordinary consciousness, which has nothing intrinsically to do with us, except that it enables us to perceive and think, leads us into dream consciousness, which has something to do with what is already present in our body. Thus we are led down into the body. And we are led still deeper down when we enter dreamless sleep. Thus we see how the psyche leads us into the body on the one hand, and how the body leads us into the psyche through rising levels, passing through the fluid organism, the aeriform organism, and the warmth organism. and thus through ever finer levels of our organism. To arrive at a worldview that really confirms and satisfies us, we must certainly take these matters into account. The great question we have been preoccupied with for weeks now, which we have repeatedly tried to explore, is the cardinal question exercising humankind. How is morality, the moral world order, connected with the physical world order? As we have often stated, our modern worldview, founded on scientific inquiry into the external world of the senses, provides no bridge between them. Whenever it seeks a more encompassing relationship with the psyche, it only has recourse to older traditions of religious faith, since psychology itself no longer provides any answers in relation to the soul. On the one hand, we have the physical world, which in this worldview emerged by swirling from a primal soup and will return eventually to a kind of universal sludge. This is the outer picture of evolution held up to us by the modern scientific community today, and must be seen as the only real picture by people who honestly adhere to it. There is no place for morality, for the moral world order in this picture. It therefore stands quite separate. We receive moral impulses in our soul as impulses of soul. But if things are as science declares them to be, then all life has emerged from a primal soup. Ultimately, the human being too, with the moral impulses rising up in him. And when the world eventually returns to cinders and sludge, all moral ideals will end up in this vast graveyard too. They will simply have disappeared. No bridge can be built here, and what is still worse, modern science cannot, if it is truly consistent, acknowledge any true morality in the world order. Science can only admit a moral world order by being inconsistent. This is all due to having, basically, only a sort of anatomy of solids, and failing to acknowledge that we also consist of a fluid, aeriform, and temperature organism. If you picture your organism as consisting not only of solid bones, muscles, nerves, but also of fluid and aeriform configurations, all in flux and inwardly mobile, and then a temperature organism as well, you will gain a better understanding of what I will now try to present from my spiritual scientific observations. Let us imagine someone inspired by a lofty moral ideal. People really can feel inwardly inspired by a moral ideal, of benevolence, say, or freedom, goodness, love, and so forth. And they can be inspired to try to realize these ideals in specific instances. But no one can imagine the enthusiasm kindled in this way in the soul finding its way into muscles or bones, as modern physiology regards them. Yet if you reflect on this properly, you will find it is not in the least difficult to imagine, and is indeed true, that when a lofty moral ideal inspires us, this exerts an influence on our warmth organism. And then already we have passed from the purely soul realm into the physical. Taking this as one example, we can therefore say that moral ideals come to expression in an increase of temperature in our warmth organism. We not only become warmer in our soul, but also, although this is not so easy to demonstrate with physical instruments, this experience of moral ideals also makes us physically, inwardly warmer. In other words, it stimulates the warmth organism. You have to picture this process quite tangibly. Enthusiasm for a moral ideal enlivens the warmth organism. Our warmth organism becomes energized when a moral idea is kindled in the soul. This effect is transmitted further through the organism. The warmth organism is, in a sense, our highest physical organism. And then we have the air organism of inhalation and exhalation, continually in flux and movement, this is, nevertheless, an organism, a real organism of air living in us, just as the temperature organism is. When a moral ideal enhances our inner warmth, the warmth organism, which is of course present everywhere within us, permeating all our other organisms, transmits this to the air organism. This action of warmth on the air organism, though, does not just warm it, but mediates to it everything I can find no other way of describing except as a source of light. You can say that seeds of luminosity are transmitted to the air organism, and thus the moral ideals which kindle the warmth organism set off sources of light in the air organism. These light sources do not appear as brightness to our outward perception and awareness, but they do appear in the human astral body. To use a physical term, they are, to begin with, bound by the air itself, which we contain within us. To start with, they are dark light, just as the seed of a plant is not yet developed. And yet, by being inspired by moral ideals or moral processes, an inner light source is created in us. Then, we have the fluid organism in us. As I said, everything is in interplay in the human organism. And so when warmth is activated in the warmth organism, through the influence of moral ideals, and sparks a light source in the air organism, albeit one that remains initially bound and hidden, something is released in the fluid organism, which, as I described it yesterday, actually underlies external airborne tones. Yesterday I said that the air is only the body of the tone, and to seek the nature of tone in nothing more than air vibrations is like seeing the human being in terms of nothing but an external visible body. The air, with its oscillating waves, is simply the tone's outer body. Tone, this spiritual tone, does not resonate in our air organism, but in our fluid organism specifically, as the consequence of a moral ideal. Here tone sources arise. Lastly, the most solid organism we possess supports and sustains all the other organisms. Something is triggered here too, as in the other organisms. But here it takes the form of something we can call a, quote, life embryo, close quote. Not, however, a physical embryo, as this separates from the mother, from the female organism at birth, but an embryo of etheric life. This embryo of etheric life remains below in our deepest unconscious depths, as to some extent also do the tone sources, and even, in a sense, the light source. They are hidden from ordinary awareness, but exist within us. Just picture this. Everything that you have inwardly experienced in life as your soul's dedication to moral ideas, whether you were merely sympathetically attracted to them as ideas, or witnessed them in others, or felt an inner satisfaction with your own actions by realizing them yourself, feeling these actions to be warmed through by moral ideals, descends into the air organism as light source, into the fluid organism as tone source, and into your solid organism as life source. And all of this, in a sense, keeps itself apart from what we are consciously aware of. And yet we carry it within us, and it is released when we divest ourselves of our physical organism at death. What germinates in our organism as a consequence of our moral ideals and purest ideas bears no immediate fruit. The moral ideals themselves, insofar as we harbor them in our life of ideas, and feel a sense of satisfaction about our moral accomplishments, these do bear fruit in our life between birth and death. This is, however, only connected with memory, and has nothing to do with what is pushed down into our organism by virtue of our sympathetic attraction to moral ideals. Our whole organism, therefore, commencing from our warmth organism, is, as we see now, permeated by moral ideals. And when at death we detach our etheric body, astral body, and I from our physical organism, these higher levels of our human nature are imbued with the impressions we gathered. With our I, we lived in our warmth organism, enlivening it with moral ideals. We lived in our air organism, where light sources were implanted, which now, after death, accompany us out into the cosmos. In our fluid organism, we have set in motion tone that becomes the music of the spheres we sound forth into the cosmos. And life, too, we bring with us out into the cosmos as we pass through the gate of death. Here you will start to fathom the nature of the life that streams through the world. Where lie the sources of life? They lie in what kindles the moral ideals that inspire us. And so we can start to see that when we allow ourselves to be warmed through and illumined by moral ideals in this present life, these will bear life, tone, and light out with us into the cosmos and become world creative powers. We bear world creative powers out into the cosmos, and morality is the source of these creative powers. In this way we discover a bridge, in a holistic view of the human being, between moral ideals and what enlivens the external physical world, also in terms of chemical substance. You see, tone has a chemical action, combining substances and separating or analyzing them out again. And all that is luminous in the world has its source in moral impulses, in our human warmth organism. As we look into the future, we can see world configurations taking shape. And just as we have to trace a plant back to its originating seed, so in gazing on worlds that will take shape in future, we have to trace them back to moral ideals that lie within ourselves. But now let us consider theoretical ideas as opposed to moral ideals. However insignificant theoretical ideas may be, there is a very important difference here. With theoretical ideas, we have the opposite effect, a cooling of the warmth organism, a damping down, see plate 11. They cool the warmth organism down. Moral or moral religious ideas, which can inspire and enthuse us and become impulses for action, have a world creative effect, whereas theoretical ideas have a damping and cooling effect on the warmth organism. This means that they also numb the air organism and thus inhibit the opening of light sources. Likewise, they exert a deadening effect on universal tone and extinguish life. In our theoretical ideas, what has been created in a past world comes to an end. A universe dies in the theoretical ideas we formulate. We bear within us the dying and dissolution of a universe, plate 11. Moral ideals, little chart here. Moral ideals stimulate the warmth organism. Theoretical ideas cool the warmth organism. Moral ideals generate light sources in the air organism. Theoretical ideas inhibit light sources. Moral ideals generate tone sources in the fluid organism. Theoretical ideas deaden tone. Moral ideals generate life embryos, etheric, in the solid organism. Theoretical ideas extinguish life. At this point, someone initiated into universal mysteries cannot use the same language as so many modern scientists do when they speak of the conservation of energy or substance. It is simply not true that substance remains constant. Substance fades away to nothing. Energy fades away to nothing in our own organism through the fact that we think theoretically. We would not be human beings if we did not think theoretically, if the universe did not continually die in us. The dying of the universe actually endows us with self-awareness, makes us beings who can formulate thoughts about the world. But as it thinks in us, the universe is already a corpse. The thought about the universe is the corpse of the universe. We only become aware of the universe as corpse, and this makes us human. A past world is therefore dying in us, right down to its substance and energy. And it is only because a new one is arising simultaneously that we do not notice that substance is fading away and arising anew. In human theoretical thinking, substance is led to its end, while substantiality and universal energy are enlivened anew through our moral thinking. What is happening inside our human skin is engaged with the dying and rebirth of worlds. Here the moral and the natural order are integrated. The natural world dies in the human being, and a new natural order is born in the moral sphere. It was because people did not wish to look at the world like this that they came up with ideas about the permanence of substance and energy. If energy and substance were conserved in perpetuity, there would be no moral world order. People wish to hide from this nowadays, and the modern worldview has every cause to conceal such a thing, for by its nature it must extinguish the moral world order, which is indeed extinguished when scientists speak of the conservation of matter and energy. If both matter and energy are conserved, the moral world order can be no more than an illusion, a chimera. We can only succeed in understanding the world in its entirety if we grasp how new worlds arise from this chimera of the moral world order. It is indeed a chimera to begin with, since it lives in thoughts. None of this can become apparent, however, if we confine ourselves to considering only the solid constituents of the human organism. We have to look beyond this, to include all levels from the fluid and air organism through to the warmth organism. We can only grasp how the human being and the world are interrelated if we trace the physical realm to its ever finer dilution, where the soul, the psyche, can directly engage with it in a state of warmth. Here we discover the connection between body and soul. It hardly matters how many more treatises are written on psychology, if they all start from views rooted in modern anatomy and physiology. They will not find a transition from this supposedly solid or semi-solid body, from its supposedly soft and hard form, to what they conceive to be soul, and yet is nothing of the kind. If, instead, we trace the corporeal realm through to warmth, we will be able to build a bridge between the bodily warmth in us and what works from the psyche into the warmth of our human organism. Warmth exists externally and within the human organism, and the soul and spirit can engage with our temperature organism, our differentiated bodily warmth, and thus mediate everything that we experience as our inner moral sense. In using the term morality, in quotes, I do not, of course, mean only a narrow Philistine concept of it, but rather the totality of all moral qualities. And thus also, for example, the impulses we acquire if we gaze on the glories of the cosmos, realizing that we have been born out of this cosmos and are responsible for what happens in the world, when we are inspired to prepare a future founded on spiritual scientific insights. If we regard the science of the spirit itself as a source of morality, then we can be inspired all the more for what is moral. This kind of inspiration and enthusiasm, drawing on spiritual scientific insights, becomes a source of higher morality. You see, what we usually call morality is only a small part of morality in general. All the ideas we formulate about the external world, about fixed natural orders, are theoretical. However striking our mathematical or mechanistic ideas about the world as a Copernican mechanism, These types of theory represent a death force in us, the corpse within us of the whole cosmos in the form of thought and idea. These things will give us ever-increasing insight into the totality of the world. Then, instead of having two parallel universes, that of the natural order and a moral order, we will find that they are one. And this is what people need today, for otherwise they will just stand there and wonder what on earth they are meant to do with their moral impulses in a world that consists of a natural order only. This question was one that weighed terribly on 19th century minds, and at the beginning of the 20th century. How can we conceive any kind of transition from the natural to the moral domain, and vice versa, from the moral to the natural? The only possible way to begin to address this really alarming question, with its impact on human destiny, is to draw on spiritual scientific insights to understand both nature and the mind. With the foundation we gain from such insights, we are then in a position to oppose the superficial science we encounter in certain fields, which popular opinion has also by now adopted. Our modern worldview is predicated on the Copernican picture, which was further elaborated by Kepler, theorized by Newton, and until 1827 shunned by the Catholic Church. Until then, no true Catholic believer was allowed to entertain this view of the world. But today it has settled so deeply into popular consciousness that of course you'd be thought a dimwit if you did not subscribe to this Copernican view of the universe. What is it exactly? Something, in fact, that has been developed in accordance with only mathematical principles and views, or we could say mechanistic mathematical views. This world view very gradually developed within ancient Greek culture, where it still retained the vestiges of former outlooks, such as the Ptolemaic, but was further elaborated into what every child is now taught as the Copernican model. We can compare this worldview with the different one that existed in ancient eras of humanity. All that remains of this is preserved in traditions of astrology and such like, albeit of a very superficial kind. These vestiges of ancient astronomy appear, for example, in ossified and moribund form in certain secret societies, Freemason societies and such like. People generally do not know that these things are the vestiges of an ancient astronomy, one, however, that was not based in the same way on merely mathematical principles as modern astronomy is. Instead, this ancient form of astronomy had emerged from clairvoyant seership. People today have very mistaken ideas about the way in which ancient humankind arrived at its astrological views. These were acquired by means of an instinctive clairvoyance of the universe. Thus the most ancient post-Atlanteans perceived spiritual configurations and beings in the stars and planets. In speaking of stars and planets, these ancient peoples were at the same time referring to spirit beings. Nowadays, people think that the sun is a burning ball of gases, and that it emits light because of this. By contrast, ancient people pictured the sun as a living being, and what appeared as the sun to their eyes was basically, for them, only the outward corporeal expression of this being of spirit, whose existence they supposed as being where the sun stood. The same was true of the other heavenly bodies. They saw spirit beings in them. And so we must conceive of an era, which ended a long time before the mystery of Golgotha, when people pictured the sun in the cosmos and the stars as beings of spirit. After this came what one could call an interim period, when people no longer quite knew how to conceive of this, seeing the planets as something physical, certainly, but picturing them as ensouled by living beings. In these times, when people no longer knew how the physical realm gradually works through into the soul realm, and how basically they are both one, a physical reality was conceived on the one hand, and a soul reality on the other, and these were seen as existing alongside one another, in the same way as most psychologists think of them today, which is of course an absurdity, or as assumed by psychophysical parallelism, which again is a misguided way of explaining something one doesn't understand. Then a time arrived when our heavenly bodies were seen as purely physical entities orbiting or standing still in accordance with mathematical laws, attracting and repulsing each other, and so on. Yet a knowledge, more instinctive in ancient times, of how things really are, was retained through all eras. We are now in a period when instinctive knowledge is not sufficient, and full awareness is required to grasp things that were once known instinctively. And if we ask how those who had full vision of the universe, that is, physical, soul, and spiritual vision, pictured the sun, we can roughly state that they conceived it as a spirit being, drawing one. Initiates conceived this spirit being as the source of all morality. And when I said, entitled The Philosophy of Freedom, that moral intuitions are drawn from this source, they are drawn, in fact, from within the earth and shimmer forth from human beings, from what can live in us as moral inspiration. Diagram 2. How greatly is our sense of responsibility enhanced if we know that without people on the earth who can kindle authentic morality or glowing spiritual ideals in their soul, the human race would not aid our world's further evolution. Rather than working toward a new creation, they would help the world to die away. This power of radiance, present upon earth, drawing 3, works out into the universe, so that what lives as morality in us shines out, invisibly initially for ordinary human perception. If a sad age dawned across the globe, when millions and millions of people passed their days devoid of spirituality, in which I included morality, which is indeed part of it, the earth would, however, still shine out in solar spiritual radiance, if only a dozen people still possessed lucid moral and spiritual enthusiasm. What shines out in this way only does so for a certain distance, where it is then reflected back upon itself, thus mirroring what shines out from the human being. Initiates of all ages have seen this mirroring as the sun. You see, there is nothing physical there, as I have often said. Whereas mainstream astronomy speaks of a glowing ball of gas, in fact, the sun is only the seemingly physical appearance of a spiritual mirroring. Diagram 4. You can therefore see how far removed the Copernican worldview was from initiation mysteries. How far removed from them even was ancient astrology. Huge power was possessed by those who considered such truths dangerous for the common populace to know about, not wishing them to be publicized. We can get a sense of this in the fate of an idealist such as Julian, who was given the epithet of apostate. He wanted to make these secrets more widely known, and was then killed by subversive means. There are certainly reasons why some secret societies refuse to share universal truths with the world, since this allows them to wield power. If in Emperor Julian's time certain secret societies had him killed, it is scarcely surprising if the guardians of particular secrets, who keep these secrets to themselves and wish to safeguard them from public knowledge in order to enlarge their power, hate it when even the least of such secrets are disclosed. And here we find part of the deeper reason why such dire hatred raises its head against what the science of the spirit feels its duty to teach humanity in our modern era. But we live now in a period when either earthly civilization will go under, or when, alternatively, humanity is given access to certain secrets. These things have hitherto been safeguarded as secrets, to which humanity once had access through instinctive clairvoyance. But they must now be reacquired through fully conscious vision, not only of the physical world, but also of the spirit within it. What did Julian the Apostate really want? He sought to awaken people to the fact that they had become increasingly accustomed to seeing the sun as only a physical entity, but that a spiritual sun exists, of which the physical sun is only a reflection. In his own way, he wanted to impart the secret of Christ to the world. But there are powers that seek to conceal the connection between Christ, the spiritual sun, and the physical sun. And this is why certain figures in positions of power become most furious of all when anyone discloses the secret of Christ in relation to the secret of the sun. This leads to all kinds of slander. But the science of the Spirit, you see, is an important matter in our present age. And only if we understand this will we give it the full and serious attention it deserves.